The Bible is, without question, one of the most influential books in human history. For thousands of years, its words have echoed through the halls of power and in the quiet moments of private life. It has shaped the very foundations of civilizations, inspired legal systems that champion justice and human dignity, and guided the moral and ethical thought of countless societies. It has offered profound meaning, comfort, and a sense of purpose to billions of people, weaving its way through a vast tapestry of cultures and generations. Yet for many today, the Bible can feel distant, even overwhelming. Its sheer size is daunting. Its narrative spans millennia, moving through unfamiliar lands and ancient empires. It contains a dizzying array of literary styles, soaring poetry, detailed legal codes, epic historical accounts, cryptic prophecy, and deeply personal letters. The path to understanding it can seem obscured by time and complexity. This video is not a sermon. It is not an argument for or against any particular belief. It is an explanation. We invite you on a calm, clear journey through the Bible's grand narrative, from its poetic beginnings in Genesis to its visionary conclusion in Revelation. Our goal is to provide context, to illuminate the story, and to equip you with a framework for understanding this monumental work. To begin this journey, we must first understand what the Bible is, and perhaps more importantly, what it is not. The Bible is not a single, monolithic book that dropped from the sky. It is a library, a carefully curated collection of sacred writings composed over a staggering period of roughly 1,500 years. It was written by more than 40 authors from all walks of life: shepherds and kings, fishermen and prophets, scholars and poets, each writing in their own time, from their own unique cultural and historical perspective. This library was written in 3 primary ancient languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Koine Greek. The story of how these texts survived is a miracle of preservation. For centuries, they were painstakingly copied by hand by dedicated scribes, first onto fragile papyrus scrolls, and later into codices, the ancient ancestor of the modern book. These scribes worked with immense reverence, believing they were handling divine words. Every letter was counted, every line checked, to ensure the text was transmitted accurately from one generation to the next. Discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century have given us a breathtaking window into this process, confirming the remarkable consistency of the texts over thousands of years. The Library of the Bible is organized into 2 major sections. The first, and by far the largest, is what Christians call the Old Testament. For the Jewish people, these are the sacred scriptures of the Tanakh. This collection tells the epic story of God and the nation of Israel. It begins with the creation of the world and follows the journey of a single family chosen to partner with God, a journey marked by promise, failure, exile, and the persistent hope of redemption. The second section is the New Testament, a collection of writings from the 1st century AD. These texts focus on the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of a Jewish man named Jesus of Nazareth, whom his followers proclaimed as the long-awaited Messiah. It continues with the story of how these followers, empowered by God's Spirit, formed the early church and began to spread their message throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. But how did this specific collection of books come together? The process of forming this library is known as canonization, from a word meaning a rule or a standard. For both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, this was not a top-down decree from a single council meeting. It was a gradual, organic process that unfolded over centuries. Communities of faith recognized certain writings as uniquely authoritative, as divinely inspired, and as faithfully telling the story of God's work in the world. They used, read, and circulated these texts in their worship and teaching, and over time, a consensus emerged about which books belonged in the sacred collection. Despite the immense diversity of authors, languages, genres, and historical eras, the Bible tells one unified and continuous story. It's a story that can be traced through a series of recurring central themes that act as narrative threads, weaving the entire collection together. One of the most important of these themes is covenant. A covenant is more than a simple contract. It's a sacred, binding relationship. The Bible is structured around a series of covenants where God enters into partnership with humanity, with individuals like Noah and Abraham, and with the entire nation of Israel. These covenants define the relationship between God and people, outlining promises, responsibilities, and the path to life and blessing. Another key theme is exile and homecoming. The story repeatedly shows humanity, and specifically Israel, wandering far from God's wisdom and presence, resulting in a state of spiritual and physical exile, a feeling of being lost and displaced. Yet, this is always met with the promise of return, of a great homecoming where God will gather his people and restore them. This pattern of brokenness and restoration is at the very heart of the biblical narrative. We also encounter the theme of wisdom. The biblical authors understood wisdom not just as intellectual knowledge, but as a skill for living, the art of navigating life successfully according to God's design for the world. The wisdom books, like Proverbs and Psalms, offer practical and poetic guidance for a life of integrity, justice, and reverence. And flowing through all of this is the hope of a Messiah, an anointed king from the line of David, who would come to rescue his people, defeat evil, and establish God's kingdom of peace and justice on earth. The New Testament authors identify Jesus as the fulfillment of this long-held hope. Finally, the entire story points toward a grand restoration. It looks forward to a time when God will heal all the brokenness of the world, renew all of creation, and dwell with humanity forever. This is the ultimate hope that drives the story forward, from the first page to the last. So, the Bible is a library of ancient texts that, together, tell one epic story. A story about God's passionate love for the world and for humanity. It's a story that doesn't shy away from the messiness of the human condition, our capacity for both incredible good and profound brokenness. But through it all, it is a story saturated with hope. A hope for redemption, for justice, and for the ultimate renewal of all things. Understanding this structure, these genres, and these core themes is the first step to reading the Bible with clarity and discovering the timeless wisdom held within its pages. The Bible begins with Genesis, a word that means origin. Its opening pages offer not a scientific textbook, but a profound theological declaration that stands in stark contrast to the chaotic creation myths of the ancient world. It opens not with a debate, but with a declaration. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This foundational phrase establishes that existence is not an accident. It has meaning, purpose, and a benevolent origin. The narrative portrays a world brought into being through divine speech, where order is spoken into chaos and light into darkness. It presents a cosmos that is intentionally designed and inherently good. This is a story about there is something rather than nothing, and it asserts that the universe is a place of deliberate beauty and purpose, a home crafted by a creator. At the pinnacle of this creation story are human beings, uniquely described as being made in the image of God. This concept is not about physical appearance, but about function and relationship. To be made in God's image was to be appointed as God's representatives on earth, tasked with a sacred vocation, to cultivate the world, to bring forth its potential, and to rule over it with the same wisdom and care as the Creator. This is a call to partnership, to reflect God's creative and ordering character in human culture, work, and relationships. It endows humanity with immense dignity and responsibility. But the story quickly turns. The early chapters of Genesis narrate a pivotal moment of choice. Presented with the freedom to trust in God's wisdom, human beings choose autonomy instead. They grasp for a knowledge apart from their Creator, seeking to define good and evil on their own terms. This choice introduces a fracture into the fabric of creation. The narrative describes this as a fall, a descent from harmony into discord. The brokenness is immediate and pervasive, not only between humans and God, but between humans and each other, and even between humanity and the natural world. The Garden of Eden is lost, replaced by a world of toil, shame, and alienation. This theme of exile, of being displaced from a place of belonging, becomes a recurring motif throughout the biblical story. The consequences of this fractured relationship unfold in the very next generation. Genesis then becomes a story of family, conflict, and the desperate need for restoration. The account of Cain and Abel, the first brothers, ends in jealousy and murder, illustrating how the rupture with God inevitably poisons human relationships. The narrative continues to trace this downward spiral. As humanity multiplies, so does its capacity for violence and corruption, culminating in the story of Noah and the flood. Here, God responds to overwhelming human wickedness with a cataclysmic act of decreation, washing the world clean to begin anew with a single righteous family. Yet, even this fresh start is not enough to solve the root problem. Soon after, the story of the Tower of Babel depicts a unified humanity, not using their collective strength for good, but for self-aggrandizement. They build a tower to make a name for themselves, a monument to their own ambition and a rejection of their dependence on God. In response, God confuses their language and scatters them across the earth. This act of judgment further entrenches the division and alienation that now characterizes the human condition. The world is now fragmented, filled with suspicion and misunderstanding. It is out of this scattered and broken world that God initiates a new plan of rescue. The focus of Genesis narrows dramatically from all of humanity to one man and his family. In the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur, God calls a man named Abram, later renamed Abraham. God's relationship with Abraham introduces a central biblical theme that will drive the rest of the story: the theme of covenant and promise. A covenant in the ancient world was a binding agreement, a solemn pact. God enters into such a pact with Abraham, giving him a threefold promise. First, Abraham is promised land, a specific place where his descendants can flourish and live out their calling. Second, he is promised descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, a great nation that will emerge from him and his wife, Sarah, who are old and childless. But the third part of the promise is the most significant. God tells Abraham that through him and his offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. This is not just a promise for one family or one nation. It is a plan to reverse the curse of Babel, to heal the fractures of the fall, and to extend God's blessing and restoration back to all of humanity. The solution to the world's brokenness will come the family of Abraham. This promise, given to a single family under a starry desert sky, becomes the seed of hope for the entire world. It is the foundational commitment around which the rest of the biblical narrative is built, a thread of divine faithfulness woven through centuries of human struggle, failure, and anticipation. The biblical narrative now pivots, its lens widening from the intimate stories of one family to the epic saga of a nation. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who had entered Egypt as honored guests during a time of famine, grow into a numerous people, the 12 tribes of Israel. But generations pass, and the political landscape shifts. A new pharaoh ascends to the throne, one who, as the text says, did not know Joseph. Fearful of this burgeoning foreign population within his borders, he reverses their status. Honored guests become state slaves. Their lives are embittered with harsh labor, building store cities for the Egyptian empire under the weight of crushing oppression. It is into this world of suffering that a pivotal figure is born: Moses. His own story begins with a desperate act of preservation. Hidden in a basket among the reeds of the Nile to escape a royal decree to kill all Hebrew infant boys. Discovered and raised in the very household of the oppressor, he is a man caught between two worlds. After fleeing Egypt as a fugitive, he encounters the divine in a remote wilderness, a voice from a bush that burns but is not consumed. He is commissioned to return, to stand before the most powerful ruler on earth and deliver a simple, audacious demand: "Let my people go." This sets the stage for a dramatic confrontation, a series of 10 plagues that demonstrate the power of Israel's God over the pantheon of Egypt. The climax is a final, devastating plague, from which the Israelites are protected by the blood of a lamb on their doorposts, an event memorialized in the ongoing practice of Passover. Finally, Pharaoh relents. The liberation, known as the Exodus, is a watershed moment. It is not merely a story of a prison break or a refugee's escape. It is the foundational event that forges the identity of the people of Israel. They are no longer defined by their servitude to Pharaoh, but by their relationship with the God who rescued them. They are a people redeemed from bondage, set apart for a unique purpose. This freedom is not an end in itself. It is not a license for anarchy or self-interest. Instead, it is a freedom something greater. The opportunity to build a new kind of society, to live in a way that reflects the character of the one who set them free. 3 months after their departure from Egypt, the Israelites arrive at the foot of a formidable mountain in the wilderness, Sinai. Here, the story pauses for one of its most significant encounters. The mountain is enveloped in smoke, thunder, and lightning, a scene of awesome and terrifying grandeur. It is in this context of overwhelming divine presence that the law is given. The law, or Torah in Hebrew, is a concept often misunderstood in the modern world, frequently reduced to a sterile list of arbitrary rules and prohibitions. But in its biblical context, it is something far richer. It is a covenant agreement, a treaty between God and this newly freed people. It is a comprehensive blueprint for a just and compassionate society, a framework designed to guide every aspect of their life together, from justice and economics to worship and family relationships. At the heart of this legal and ethical framework are the 10 Commandments. These are not presented as suggestions, but as foundational principles for how a liberated people can live in community without descending into the chaos of might makes right, the very system they just escaped in Egypt. They begin by defining their relationship with God, exclusive loyalty to the one who rescued them. Then they pivot to define their relationships with each other. They protect the family unit, the sanctity of life, the stability of marriage, the right to property, and the integrity of one's reputation. They are the essential guardrails that make true freedom possible, preventing it from collapsing into a destructive free-for-all where the strong prey on the weak. Beyond the 10 Commandments, the law provides detailed statutes for civil life. It establishes principles of restorative justice, where the goal is to repair harm rather than simply to punish. It creates provisions to protect the most vulnerable members of society, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner. It institutes regular rhythms of rest, the weekly Sabbath, for all people and even for the land itself, a radical idea in the ancient world of constant labor. It outlines a system of worship centered on a portable sanctuary called the Tabernacle, a place where God's presence would dwell among them. The law was a gift, a guide for how to live as God's people in the world, reflecting His justice and holiness to the surrounding nations. To receive such a profound calling is one thing. To live up to it is another entirely. The journey from Sinai to the Promised Land, which should have taken weeks, stretches into 40 years. The wilderness becomes a crucible, a place of testing that reveals the deep-seated struggles within the heart of the people. The narrative does not shy away from their failures. It portrays them with unflinching honesty. They complain about the food. They question Moses' leadership. They express a longing to return to the familiar slavery of Egypt rather than face the uncertainties of freedom. The most dramatic failure occurs at the foot of Sinai itself. While Moses is on the mountain receiving the law, the people below, gripped by fear and impatience, persuade his brother Aaron to construct a golden calf. They worship the idol, celebrating it as the God who brought them out of Egypt. It is a profound betrayal, a violation of the very first principles of the covenant they had just agreed to. This act reveals a fundamental tension that will run through the rest of the biblical story. The human tendency toward fear, idolatry, and a desire for a God that can be controlled and manipulated, rather than a God who must be trusted and obeyed. This cycle of rebellion, divine judgment, and subsequent appeal for mercy repeats itself throughout their wilderness wanderings. They doubt God's ability to give them the promised land, and as a result, an entire generation is condemned to wander until they die in the desert, never to enter their destination. Israel struggles to live up to this high calling. They wander, they doubt, they fail, again and again. Yet, if the story were only about human failure, it would be a tragedy. The biblical narrative insists on a deeper truth. It emphasizes that failure is not the end. In the face of Israel's repeated unfaithfulness, the story highlights God's persistent, often surprising, faithfulness. After the golden calf incident, Moses intercedes for the people, and God relents from his anger, choosing to renew the covenant. When the people cry out for water, it is provided from a rock. When they hunger, a mysterious food called manna appears on the ground each morning. The narrative portrays a God who is not distant and impassive, but deeply invested, patient, and committed to his covenant promises, even when his covenant partners are not. This dynamic of human failure and divine faithfulness becomes a central theme of the entire Bible. It establishes that the relationship is not sustained by the people's perfect performance, but by God's enduring grace and commitment. The wilderness journey, with all its hardships and mistakes, ultimately serves to teach Israel a crucial lesson. They are completely dependent on God's provision and forgiveness. Their survival and their future hope rest not in their own strength or moral perfection, but in the steadfast character of the God who rescued them from Egypt and continues to guide them, even through their own self-inflicted detours. The covenant holds, not because the people are flawless, but because God remains faithful. Israel eventually becomes a kingdom. Kings rise: Saul, David, Solomon. David is described as flawed yet devoted. Solomon is wise yet compromised. As power grows, so does corruption. This is where the prophets emerge. Prophets are not fortune tellers, they are truth tellers. They confront injustice, exploitation, and hypocrisy. Their message is consistent: care for the poor, act justly, walk humbly, return to faithfulness. Alongside prophecy, the Bible includes wisdom literature. Books like Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes explore suffering, joy, meaning, mortality. These writings are deeply human, honest about doubt, pain, and longing. They acknowledge that faith does not erase struggle. The New Testament begins with expectation. Israel is under Roman rule. Hope for deliverance is strong. Jesus enters this moment quietly. He does not arrive as a political conqueror, but as a teacher and healer. Jesus speaks about love, forgiveness, humility, and the kingdom of God. He challenges religious systems that prioritize rules over compassion. His message centers on transformation, not domination. Jesus is eventually executed by crucifixion. In the biblical narrative, the crucifixion is not defeat, but sacrifice. The resurrection becomes the turning point. It represents hope beyond death, restoration beyond failure, and life beyond despair. After Jesus, the story continues through the early church. Followers spread the message across the Roman world. They faced persecution, hardship, and misunderstanding. Letters written by early leaders address real problems: fear, division, ethics, perseverance. Christianity spreads not through force, but through community, care, and conviction. The Bible concludes with Revelation. Revelation is symbolic, not literal. It uses imagery to communicate hope, that injustice will not last, suffering will not prevail, and renewal is possible. The final vision is not destruction, but restoration. A renewed world, a restored relationship between God and humanity. The Bible ends where it began, with creation made whole. The Bible is not simply about rules or rituals. It is about meaning. It addresses the deepest human questions. Why are we here? Why is there suffering? What does it mean to live well? Whether one believes or not, the Bible remains one of humanity's most profound explorations of faith, failure, hope, and purpose. This has been the Bible Explained Clearly.